Welcome back. Well, we've done the hard work, we've been patient, and we've been rewarded with bucket loads of Roma tomatoes. And as you know already, Romas are my favourite. Lovely, reliable, prolific, great fruiting tomato. And the next step is, because we can't eat all of these, and they're only going to be fruiting for, weeks to a month or something like that. So we need to preserve them. So that's what we're going to run through today. This is a jar that I preserved last year, March 24. It's got on the lid. These are still great. We've still got plenty left. Every year I try to grow more than we need, because some years the crops aren't so good, so you get more or less just depending how the season is. This one's from April 24, and you can see here two different styles or types of preserving jar, and I will get to that and talk about the different types of jars that you can use. So what we're going to do now is look at how do we turn these tomatoes into this passata or tomato juice, condensed tomato juice, that I'm going to put in these jars and put through a pressure cooking process to preserve them, which a lot of you will call canning. That's a very popular term for it in the United States. Here in Australia, often people call it bottling. I call it canning. I guess I'm picking up that habit now because of the pressure cooking process that we use to make sure that there's no bacteria or other nasties that are going to be in these jars that are going to develop over their relatively long storage period. Tomatoes are great for this because they're naturally high in acid. And I'll talk about that a little bit later, because they're not as high in acid as they used to be, and we do have to take that into account a little bit in our process. But as I said, first of all, we've got to take them from being this into something we can actually preserve in the jar. So let's have a look at the gear. Okay, so this is my piece of kit for reducing the tomatoes down to juice. Basically, just got a feeding bowl on top, so we're going to shove the tomatoes in there. We're going to turn the handle. This is a manual one. You can get them with a motor, and one of my good friends has one of those, and I have borrowed it, and it's an absolutely wonderful machine. But I'm a prepper from way back, so the manual one will work without electricity, so that's what I like about it. It's a little bit of effort, but it's not too bad, and we'll bowl through this bowl of tomatoes pretty quick. So then there's a screw that runs down the centre of this part here, and it compresses the tomatoes as they go through and crushes them all up. And the juice comes out of these perforations, runs down this chute and drops into the pot that I've got below there. And what comes out the end is pretty much, as you'll see, just the skins, the seeds and a small amount of pulp. It does a really good job of extracting pretty much all of the liquid and the pulp. So they're a great machine, well worth the investment, and it makes light work of doing this, to have something like this. If you've got the money and can afford it and you want to buy one with the electric motor, yeah, by all means, and they're great, but these work terrifically well. So let's load it up and get started. Okay, so now it's simply a matter of loading up our hopper periodically and then just feeding them through, and you'll feel the pressure build up as the tomatoes start to compress into the screw there, which then crushes them up against the sieve on the outside. And you can see the dryish remnants of tomato, the seeds and so forth, coming out the end, and the juice is starting to run down the pan and drop down into my pot. So all we need to do is just keep feeding this up, keep cranking the handle. It does tend to move around a bit. I have to hang on to it a bit. You've got to put a bit of force into it. And then keep loading up the hopper as you go. All right, so when we've finished, what we've got left is a pan full of all the solids. There's a lot of seeds in there if you're into seed saving, so you want to pick those out and just blot them out on some toilet paper or kitchen paper or something like that. And once they dry out, you keep them for the next season and away you go again. But that's going to go to the chooks, who'll tidy all of that up. And now I've got a fairly large pot, almost, not quite sure what you can see inside there, but almost full of that tomato juice. And that's from 2 of those big bowls of Romas. So pretty productive. Plenty of stuff there. We'll fill up a few jars without a doubt. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put this on to simmer for a bit. Then I'll come back and talk about the actual preserving jars and getting those ready to hot pack with the liquid. Okay, so let's talk about preserving jars. I mentioned earlier there are 2 types that I use. I won't talk brands here. It's not that I am or am not sponsored or anything like that. But if there is any sponsorship, that will all be clearly declared on the videos. But there are 2 main types, I suppose, that are used. Here in Australia, this particular style of jar has been dominant for years. And they work by having a rubber, you can see that a rubber seal applied to the lip, like a rubber band. And you have to make sure that's orientated correctly so that when the lid sits on, it's going to form a seal. So the stainless steel lid goes on the top, and then there are these clips that clip on top of the jar, and that goes into your boiler if you're just doing 100 degrees C boil, or into your pressure canner if you're pressure cooking them, which is what I prefer to do. And these type of jars with the rubber band as the seal are excellent for fruit and tomatoes and things like that. Things that have some acidity to them, and products that don't come out of the ground particularly. The manufacturer of these jars doesn't really recommend them for things other than fruit and acidic things like tomatoes. The seals work pretty well. I do get every now and then a jar that doesn't seal very well, but it's not common. It does happen. But for preserving anything other than those acidic things and fruits and the like, I go for this other style of jar, which has a screw lid and has a cap with a seal around it that sits on top. And then for the preserving process, the heat treatment, there's a ring that screws on and holds that in place. Both these styles have been around for over 100 years. They're tried, they're proven, they work very well. This is a superior seal, and in my opinion. And particularly if you're going to do beans or potatoes, and certainly you can fish and meats and other things in these jars, you need this good type of seal. So that's why I use these. But for tomatoes, I'm comfortable using these. I've got heaps of them. I've been collecting them over the years. My mum used them for years for all sorts of things, and I've inherited a bunch from her as well. So I use these a lot, and I'll be using them today. Just a note, technically speaking, and I know people reuse these rubber seals, it's not recommended. You should use a new seal every time, and it's the same for these stainless steel lids with the seal on them. They are technically, from the manufacturer's specifications, a single use only and designed to be thrown away. The jars, of course, you can clean those and use those as long as you don't get chips around the top, which you should always check for on that sealing surface, whatever type of jar you're using. Wherever that sealing surface is, make sure there's no chips or cracks, or you may get losses. And it's important when you're preserving food, particularly with regards to a bacteria called botulism, and those bacteria can survive 100 degrees Celsius for quite a period of time. So just boiling is not necessarily enough. And that's why I pressure can. Okay, so I've got some water boiling now on my stove. And what I'm going to do is just drop in some whole tomatoes. I've picked out some of a nice size that I think will just be nice for putting into a jar. And it's nice to have some whole peeled tomatoes on hand just for casseroles or curries, or just for a fry up, that kind of thing. So I put them in here until the skins are literally splitting and starting to lift off them. So that just takes, you know, a minute or so as the water boils. And then I'll take them out and drop them in this cold water here. And that's just for my comfort, so I can handle them, and I'll let them cool off for a bit. So we'll just let them simmer in there until the skins start to split. Okay, so as you can now see, these skins are starting to fall off these now. So I'm just going to take them out, pop them in some cold water, and let them cool down for a couple of minutes. And then as you'll see, we'll literally be able to squeeze these straight out of those skins, and they're ready to go into a jar. So I'll just finish getting those out. You can only fit sort of 3 or 4 into a jar. I just want to do a couple of jars, so I haven't put many in, but obviously you can do as many as you like. Okay, so I've got my jar here, and just putting my little stainless steel funnel in here. By the way, everything, the bench tops, this board's been cleaned, actually had some boiling water run over it. The jars have all been cleaned in the dishwasher at high temperature before this. They're going to basically get autoclaved, so they will end up being sterilised in the cooking process, but I still like to keep things as clean as possible. So those skins come off pretty easy now. You can literally just pull them off and drop the tomato in. Sometimes it's easy if you just cut the end off, and then you can literally squeeze it straight out and into the pot. So it depends how much the skins come off in that little cooking process, but it's pretty easy. Looks like I'm going to comfortably get 4 in there. So that's that one, and then I'll grab another jar. I've got another 4, so that'll work out nicely to fill 2 jars. Okay, so steaming away here, I've got my reduced tomato passata, or thickened tomato juice if you prefer, and it's obviously still hot. You can see the steam coming out of there. So now I'm going to pack it into these jars, and I'm going to put some in on top of the whole peeled tomatoes. They've sat for a while. They've settled down into the jars a bit, and I think probably packed down, they'll probably fit pretty comfortably just into a single jar. I was probably a bit conservative with how much I put in. The key thing is you don't want to really overfill the jars. You don't want stuff protruding above the top liquid level. So anyway, so that's filled that jar pretty nicely now. And as I said, we're going to pack these with some of the juice. So I'm going to put some of that in. I won't get a lot in because that's pretty full now. But what I need to do is make sure that that settles down and there's no air gap. So whenever you're canning whole fruits, or in this case tomatoes, or any other sort of largish objects, you need to make sure that you get the air bubbles out and all rising to the top. So a bit of stirring and so forth will do that for you successfully. I have now overpacked this a bit. I'm just going to take one out. And there, that's a pretty good depth. I've got my air gap at the top. You think it's just very slightly over full, but I think that will be fine. I always just run a finger around the top to make sure that seal area is clean, and then on with the ring cap and the lid. Not completely tight, because that air's got to expand. And if you tighten this right up and seal it, you're going to break your jar during the temperature treatment. So it's just sort of a loose finger tight is all that's required. The ring just holds the lid in place. And as the jar cools after the processing in the pressure canner, the vacuum will pull that lid down, and that's what then creates that very firm seal. So I've got a bunch of jars to fill, but there's something else I have to do in each of these jars before I fill them. Now, I've done that already in those other jars with the whole tomatoes in them, but I haven't done them here. Now, we're working with these jars are just under 500 ml, or a pint if you're using imperial measurements. And for each pint, we're going to need a half teaspoon of salt and a quarter teaspoon of citric acid. Salt, of course, I just use normal table salt. I don't bother with iodized table salt for this, though I do use that in other forms of cooking. But just normal salt, you can buy it in bulk, it's very cheap. The citric acid, you can buy this pretty readily online. It's not super expensive, and you can buy it in quantity using a quarter teaspoon at a time. So it's going to last a long time. It's not the kind of thing that degrades too readily, as long as you keep your bags nicely sealed. So I'll go ahead and put the salt and citric acid in the jars, and then we're going to fill them. So hoping that I have enough jars here. I didn't actually work out using measurements how many I needed, but this will probably be all right. So here goes half a teaspoon of salt in each of these jars. So why salt? As I'm sure you're aware of the methods of preserving, of which there are a few, salting is one of them. Now, we're not putting in enough salt here to preserve by salt on its own, but salt, and if you're candying, sugar, both these things interfere with the ability of bacteria and other organisms to contaminate, or to grow and replicate, and thereby contaminate your food. So it's just like an added precaution to help preserve and to help preserve colour. So a quarter teaspoon of citric acid as well in each one. And the citric acid similarly is lowering the pH. And by lowering the pH, we also interfere with the ability of these organisms that might spoil our food to replicate. Now, I've just got to concentrate a little bit here, make sure I don't miss a jar. Now, will this make your preserved tomatoes a little bit acid? Well, yes, it will. And the reason for adding this, in times gone by, you would not have needed to do this, because the species of tomatoes that existed previously were quite significantly more acidic than the modern ones. So we have to add a little bit now to make that up. Now, if they turn out, when you're cooking with them, that they're a little bit too acid, a pinch of baking powder will soon bring that pH down. Don't overdo it, because baking powder, I find, can alter or add a taste if you use too much, but just pinch at a time, and that'll bring that acidity down quickly and nicely. Okay, so now our jars are ready for filling. Here's the fun bit, and the messy bit too, if I'm not careful. That'll get me in trouble. So I'm just simply going to ladle this into the required height. And that's really all we need to do. It's pretty straightforward, nothing too technical here. Okay, so they're all packed, air gap at the top, lids on, but not too tight. For the ones that seal with the rubber rings, the lids are clipped on now to hold them in place. I'll just make sure that's all nice and even. It is important just to get that bit right. So I got more jars than I thought I was going to get out of that, actually. What have we got here? 12 pints, yes, pints plus 2 sort of almost quarts. So a pretty good haul, really, out of that couple of bowls of Roma tomatoes. I mentioned we added the citric acid, we added the salt. So just doing the mental check, I haven't forgotten anything. The next thing is to pack them into the pressure canner. So this is it. This is what I preserve things in. So the jars are going to go in here to get treated. There's a couple of components. There's a lid that when it's fitted on properly, it's rotated into place and that locks it. So as this begins to boil, pressure will build up inside. As that pressure builds up, there is a little safety cap here that will pop up to indicate to you that it's now under pressure, and that will lock this lid. You will not be able to turn this or open it while it's under pressure. That's an important safety consideration. Steam under pressure is extremely dangerous. It's hotter than 100 degrees Celsius. We're probably going up to 115, 120, something like that in this cooker at its peak temperature. So you definitely don't want to be exposed to that steam. So you need to be careful. There's a gauge on the top that reads in PSI, pounds per square inch, and there's a weight that sits on this little pressure release here. And I've got, this weight can be taken apart, so it can have different settings just by adding or removing some of the weights to this little weight. I've got it set so this is going to go to 15 PSI. So you'll see that pressure coming up on the gauge. Once the safety cap's locked, there won't be any steam coming out. It'll all be inside here, building up pressure. And when it hits 15, that'll be enough weight to lift this cap. And it will start to spin a little bit or go backwards and forwards, and steam will be coming out, and it will settle at 15 and stay there for the duration of the cook. So that's what I use as a pressure canner. How do I know how long to cook it for? Well, that's where this book comes in. If you can get hold of this while it's still on the internet, who knows whether the current cost cutting in America may see this removed, but this is the US, I think their version of the Department of Agriculture. I can't remember the exact name of it. I'm sure it says it on the cover here. United States Department of Agriculture, there you go. National Institute of Food and Agriculture. This is a 2015 revision. There may be a later one. You can download the sections in here as PDFs. And, you know, when you get to my favourite things to preserve, I've got all sorts of sticky notes and labels and things like that in there just to help me with the conversions to local units and stuff like that. But that book is the Bible, and it's free, so why not grab it? I mean, it's really excellent. It's got an introduction that explains the principles of preserving using pressure and heat, and really steps you through what you need to do. So I'm going to be preserving essentially what's tomato juice itself, and I'm actually going to do some whole tomatoes, and they will be packed in some of that juice as well. So I'm going to go and peel a few of those in a moment. I've got some water boiling that I'm going to use for that, so I'll show you that process in a second. And inside this book there are tables. So this is the table I'm going to use here. You may not be able to read it. I might write some stuff up in the comments for you. But these tables tell you for the pressure that you're using and the altitude that you're at, which you have to factor in, how long to cook it for. So we're above 1,000 feet here, actually about 2,500 feet where I live. We're going to run at 15 pounds per square inch. So once we've reached 15 PSI, that's when you start the timer. Once you've reached the pressure, the table here tells me I've got to cook for 15 minutes of processing time. So once this is spinning around and the dial's reading 15, I'll start my timer, and 15 minutes afterwards I'll then turn this off and allow it to cool, and then remove my jars. As the jars cool, there will be a little bit of a vacuum form, which is why you have to leave, if you can see inside that jar, see how I've left a bit of airspace at the top. Now that airspace is important because that air is what contracts and creates a vacuum, and that's what sucks the lid down. If you fill it to the top, the liquid isn't going to contract anywhere like the air is. So you have to have that air gap. That's what creates your seal. And believe you me, once that's sealed, you're not going to remove that with your hands. You'll need a tool to prise that lid off, and use a blunt, smooth tool, because otherwise you'll chip your jar and have to get a new one. It's the same with these style of jars, you know, when you finish the cook, you can try and remove that lid and you can put a bit of force into it. It's not going to come off if it's sealed properly. If it comes off, it wasn't sealed properly. You can run it through again, or maybe just pop that one in the fridge for immediate use if they don't seal. Most of the time they do if you've set it all up carefully. So, welcome to the eerie depths of my pressure canner. I've already put a few jars in here. I'm going to just finish putting some more in. Now, as you can see, there was about 2 or 3 inches of water in here when I started. And obviously the level comes up as I add these jars. Now, I don't want too much that the water comes over the top of the lid of the jars here, but I also want to make sure I have enough water in there that this will not boil dry. That's really important. Once this is pressurized at 15 psi, which is the pressure I've got it set to, the temperature will stabilize because the pressure won't shift after that. So in a funny way, the steam, whilst it's very hot, is actually then has a cooling effect on everything in that the temperature will be stable. If it boils dry, there's no steam in there anymore to hold that temperature, then you'll begin to cook things very hot, probably break your jars, it'll be an awful mess. This amount of water will be tons, there will be plenty left over. I probably overdid it if anything. So you do need to put enough water in that it's going to survive the boil. Now I'm stacking different sized jars in here. Now, is that all right? Well, this is where you go back to your trusty book and you look up the cooking time that you're going to have. And with tomatoes, for pints or quarts, it's the same time. So as long as everything in here requires the same time at that high temperature, then we're golden. And we can mix different types of product. It doesn't all have to be tomatoes. It's all about the time it has to stay at that temperature. And as long as you don't come over the top of the lid here, you can double stack. That's fine too. Though I do prefer, because they will rattle around a little bit if they're properly packed in there, but I'm going to take the punt. Actually, what I might do is put a couple of empty jars in there before I seal it up, just to stop them from tipping over while they're going through the cooking process. So I'll go and put those in, and we'll put the lid on, and it's time to start cooking. Okay, so I've got to put the lid on. I only go on one way pretty much. There is a little arrow on here. You're probably not going to pick that up in the camera, but it has to line up with an arrow that's on this part of the pot here. So once it's there, it drops in, then I rotate it to seal it. The handles, top and bottom parts of the handles line up, and we're good to go. And if you'll remember, I've got my pressure gauge on there, I've got my weight in place. My pot's ready to go on the stove. Okay, so I'm just waiting for that pot to boil and come up to pressure. As for the timings, again, the trusty guide that I talked about earlier has everything you need to know in it. And I strongly recommend that you read this information and learn it, because if you're going to preserve foods, it is very important to understand the rules and the guidelines around it. It's important for your safety. So, you know, don't take my word for what to do on these videos. Go back to the guide and come to grips with it yourself. I'm providing these as a sort of general how-to and to show you that it's pretty easy actually, just as long as you do the right things and concentrate and focus on it. So here's our pot. It's been on the stove for a while now, waiting for pressure to build up. The first thing that happens is that this little safety valve at the top pops up and seals. And I've just managed to unseal it. And once it seals, this lid is locked in place. It can't be removed because you don't want to open this while it's hot. As you can see, we're nearly at 15 psi now, and the weight is just starting to let a bit of steam out. And in a minute or two, that will be vigorously letting steam out. The pressure will hold at 15 psi. And at that moment that we start our timer, we've got to do 15 minutes, and then we shut it down. Okay, well, we're comfortably at 15 psi now, and as you can see, our Wade is just doing this little dance, wobbling backwards and forwards, letting the excess pressure out. So 15-minute timer start, and then we can turn it off. Right, so our 15 minutes at the 15 psi is now done. So I'm simply going to turn the gas off on the hob, and I'm just going to let that cool down. You can hear that sort of beginning to come off the boil fairly quickly. It will hiss for a while, more steam will come out, and then that will stop. Can you remove the weight and let the pressure out quickly? You can, but I find letting it cool a bit more slowly, and maybe just letting a bit of steam out here and there, is better. If you let it out quickly, you'll get a lot of bubbling in the pots, and you'll lose a lot of the liquid. Will come out through the lids and go into the bottom of the vessel. So I tend to just let it take its time and cool that way. And once that's done, once it's cool enough and the little safety cap at the back has dropped back down, we'll be able to remove the lid and take our jars out very carefully. They'll still be very hot. In fact, they'll still be boiling inside when you remove them, unless you let the whole thing go completely cold, which you can do as well. Okay, well, my pressure cooker's off the stove. It's largely cooled down now, so you can easily remove the lid, quite safe to do so. And we can take our jars out. The rings come off. If you leave these on, they will corrode, and you'll get corrosion on the inside of the ring and around the lid. So you don't want that. Once this is sealed, you do not need the ring on anymore. They can go and get cleaned up and go back into wherever you store them. But that lid is very firmly in place. That's not going to come off. That's not going to leak. Same here. So we can remove all the jars and get all the lids off them. There's the two ones I put in just to make up space. Let's have a look at our rubber seal type jar. I'll just take the clip off the top. And yeah, once again, I don't know if you can see that, but there's a dip in the lid, which shows the force of the air pressure on there. There's a vacuum in that space that we left, and that's well and truly secure. So it looks like we're getting a good seal. These can all come out now. There's plenty of water left in the bottom, so I certainly put more in than I required, but that's not a problem, as I say, as long as you don't go sort of above this line, because then it can penetrate your jars and fill up that air gap, and that's not what you want. So that's the first batch done. I can do another batch and another batch and another batch and keep going till they're all done. I've just got one or two other jars to do here, and then that's today's lot. And by the time I get back in the kitchen on the weekend, there'll be a whole another couple of bowls full to process, and so on like mad until we've got the whole season's tomatoes jarred, put away, countless pastas, casseroles and whatever to enjoy over the year. So I hope you found that useful, interesting. Please let me know your feedback and questions and everything else in the comments, and I'll look forward to seeing you on the next video.